Hi, my name is Nicole. I'm here with the Pearl Review, my new YouTube channel, talking to you today about Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. This book was published in 1985, and it was one of the most thought-provoking books that I read last year. This book is great for anyone who is interested in politics or the news at all. It's still relevant today. Postman begins his book by comparing George Orwell's 1984 to Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World. And he says that basically by his time and what he pictures the future as evolving further into is much more closer to Aldous Huxley's vision of a dystopian future. That rather than burning books, we would instead walk away from them because we were entertained by something else, namely television. Postman's main premise in this book is that all TV is entertainment. And if you're watching the news on TV, you are being entertained. The book gives us a brief history of media, starting with the typographical age, which is what Postman describes as when people were only reading journals, and those journals were only about things that were happening in their area. This changes when the telegraph is invented, and people are getting information that's coming from all over the world, and that they're reading it in these journals or newspapers. Now, normally, personally, I would like to learn about everything that's happening, whether it be in my town or across the world. But he says that that actually adds to this issue of irrelevance being in journalism. That if you had one piece of news that was directly related to your daily life, adjacent to a piece of news that was trivial, that was something that was going on, thousands of miles away, that these two pieces of news would get equal coverage. And so the sense of importance about, each one was distorted. Now, after the invention of the telegraph comes the invention of the photograph, which revolutionizes journalism. Postman is very pessimistic about photography. He sees it as a replacement of an article, of intellectual content. Postman includes a great quote in this book, which I think sums up his feelings about TV, which is by George Bernard Shaw. After looking at Times Square, he famously remarked, "It must look beautiful if you don't know how to read." Now, after the invention of the photograph, we have the invention of television, which brings us up to Postman's own time. Again, he's very against TV news. You don't have time to think. It's just entertainment. There's no exposition. But now he also says that it also desensitizes us to violence and tragedy, that we watch TV news from our home. It has this familiar format. It's digestible. We don't feel uncomfortable because it's entertainment. And so when we are getting our news that way, we become more passive about terrible things that are happening. Now, this is not to say that people don't get upset when they watch or listen to the news, but I believe there is some truth in saying that when you have a format that you expect, that you come back to every day, there is this feeling of safety and normalcy to it. And that makes us more passive when we hear or listen to these upsetting pieces of news. He goes on to say that television now affects elections too, that what a candidate looks like affects their performance. A great example of that he mentions is a famous debate between Richard Nixon and JFK in 1960, which was the first televised debate. In it, you can see that Nixon looks pretty rough, like he just had left the hospital, I think, a day or so before. I think he had pneumonia. Nixon was convinced after this event that it ruined his campaign. My favorite part of this book is the crankiest part of this book. And that's when Postman talks about PBS and Sesame Street. Postman suggests that children, after watching Sesame Street, don't love education. They love education that looks like TV, and that's dangerous for kids that are going into school and for the teachers that are trying to educate them. He goes on to talk about the voyage of the Mimi as a shining example of the limitations of educational television. This is hilarious for me because I watched the voyage of Mimi in 6th grade. Also, it contains a very young Ben Affleck who is not older than 13. Postman's main problem with the voyage of the Mimi is that the content that is in the show is chosen only because it's televisable. The children are learning about whales because whales look cool. What I love about this book is that it reminds us to be vigilant. That when we watch or listen to the news, we are being informed, but we're also being entertained. I think with 24-hour news coverage, we're also overwhelmed by all the information that we're bringing into our daily lives. And that this is not a normal thing, that we as a society didn't do that until very recently. And it is reflective of our own habits in consumption. This book is curmudgeonly, but it's thought-provoking, and I love it. If you have any thoughts about this book or this review, please feel free to message me or to comment below. I really hope that you enjoyed this review, and I thank you for listening.
And now for something completely different.